In this video, I'll show you a way of reframing the way you look at data that will help you see the world much more as it really is. Hi, my name's Scott McArthur and welcome to the Edge of Next podcast, where we look at day-to-day life through a different lens. I try very much to give you thoughts and techniques and methodologies that can help you really understand how to best reach forward into the future of work. And my absolute ultimate aim is to put the human back in human resources. If you enjoy my content, please hit the subscribe button and hit that little bell, and that'll make sure you're part of the conversation. Let's get into this one. I'm recording this in November 2020, a time of year when we traditionally celebrate and remember those who have fought for our countries. My grandfather, James Scott, who I've spoken about before, did many things in the Second World War. One of those was quite unusual for someone who was in the Navy. He was actually a rear gunner in the Fleet Air Arm. Now the numbers vary, but being a rear gunner in a bomber in the Second World War was not a particularly promising thing to be. It was very dangerous and very many people did not come back from the various missions. Because of this, there were groups of engineers and scientists always looking for ways to make our aircraft safer. One such person was Abraham Ward, who was a statistician, and he was part of a team that were looking at aircraft as they returned from the missions I mentioned earlier. Now it's a long story, but Abraham noticed something. There was something that his fellow engineers were not doing. They were producing maps and complex mathematical models for how the aircraft returned, and they were creating images like this. Now you can see in this image where the actual aircraft was shot, where there are holes in the fuselage. And the engineers at the time were challenged with, okay, given this data, where should we put extra armour? Let me just pause for one moment and ask you to look at this picture. I'll zoom into this picture and you tell me where you think the armour should go to make this aircraft safer. Now, I wonder what you decided. Did you decide to put armour where the bullet holes were? Well, I wouldn't be surprised by that, and I think when I first thought about that, I would have done the same thing. But the thing is, Abraham Ward spotted that there was a problem with this data. You see, there was a huge number of aircraft not being examined. And that, of course, was the aircraft that were shot down. These were the aircraft that were not successful and did not have the luck to make it back from the various missions. And Abraham suggested that perhaps what they should do is not put armour where the bullet holes were in the surviving aircraft, but they should put more armour where there weren't any bullet holes, because he postulated that it was these areas that were getting hit by the enemy fire, and that resulted in the other aircraft not making it home. Now this might seem quite smart, but to be honest, I've seen it many times. I've even seen it in human resources. So let me paint you a familiar picture if you work in HR or perhaps in recruitment. You've undertaken a large-scale programme of talent acquisition. You're looking for new people, perhaps these days to work from home, and you've been through a recruitment process. After the process, you've selected the people you'd like to join the company, you send out your offers and they come to the business. Then what you decide to do, and this is good practice, you decide, okay, let's check that what we did was good and well done. Did we do a good job? Did we really make sure we got the best people? So you set out to do a little bit of an experiment. You go and you meet the people who have just been recruited. You ask them what the recruitment process was like, what it felt like to go through the assessment centres, how it was when they were facing the various batteries of tests that you set them. And they of course gave you their response. Having gathered the data, you put together a report and take it to the board to tell them how the recruitment process went. Now, you'll report that and say we did well. The feedback from the delegates says that we did jolly well. They're feeling that we fulfilled our obligations for diversity and inclusion, and that we are an employer that they're excited to work for. But if you understood that little story about Abraham Ward, you'll spot that there's a flaw. They didn't actually include everyone in the data set. They didn't go to the people who were unsuccessful, who didn't get a job as part of your talent campaign. And I wonder if their answers to the questions would be quite so positive. So are you creating an environment where things look better than they really are? In such circumstances, many organisations and indeed individuals can make false decisions. These are because people look at the data set and think, okay, we've concentrated on the people who made it through, whatever the test was, whatever the process that filtered people out was, and we looked just simply at those that made it through. This is known as survival bias. In such circumstances, failure tends to be ignored. And we all actually really know, somewhere in here, in our gut, that you really have to understand where people failed in order to really understand what's happening in your organisation. It's quite interesting when you look at the literature, you look at the personal development world, and you look at how many people look at these and consider these individuals. So let me give you a very simple example. If you look at somebody like Elon Musk and Zuckerberg, they dropped out of high school. And many people therefore make the conclusion that you don't need to go to high school to be successful. But of course that's not true. That's a false correlation. It's just a coincidence. Because in those books, there's nothing in there about the people who went to college, got their college degree, and did very, very well after that in organisations. In reality, there's no special property that these individuals have. This is complex, multifactorial, difficult to understand stuff. So the lesson here, quite simply, is to make sure when you're looking at how you've got on with a process, with an initiative, any time there's a test or any time there's a gate where people come in one end and fewer people come out the other, if you're testing how effective that process has been, don't forget to include the people who didn't make it through that process. In this video I'm going to be talking about fish and chips, or maybe the occasional piece of black pudding.